The first silence. The podcast studio was quiet in a way that made even the smallest sound feel heavy. The cameras were set, the lights were dim but steady, and the microphones waited like patient guardians. Joe Rogan leaned back in his chair, his familiar mix of curiosity and calm filling the room. Across from him sat Keanu Reeves, dressed simply, his posture relaxed, yet carrying a kind of gravity that few could explain. There was no need for flashy entrances or big announcements. The silence before the first question was enough to hold. The audience. Joe finally broke the silence with a question that seemed too simple at first. "Keanu," he said softly, "why do people keep calling you the kindest man in Hollywood?" Keanu smiled. Not the kind of smile made for cameras, but the kind that lived quietly at the edge of his soul. He looked down for a moment, his fingers brushing the edge of the table. "I don't know about that," he said. "But I believe kindness is the only thing that lasts." Those words pulled the room tighter. Joe leaned forward. The audience could feel something beginning. Something more than a casual conversation. It was a doorway into a story that had been lived, not just told. Keanu spoke about small moments, the kind most people forget. Holding the door for a stranger, offering his seat on the subway, pausing to listen when someone was clearly in pain. "These things don't cost anything," he said, his voice low and steady. "But they can change the way someone sees the world for a day, maybe even for a lifetime." Joe nodded but pushed deeper. "But why do you think it matters so much? Hollywood isn't exactly known for kindness. It's known for competition, ego, power. And yet, you've built a life on the opposite?" The question hung heavy, like smoke that wouldn't clear. Keanu took a deep breath. "Because I've lost more than I can count," he said slowly, "and every time I lost something, the only thing that healed me was kindness. Not money, not fame, not success, just kindness." Suddenly the energy shifted. Viewers who came for an easy story about movies or action scenes were now caught in something more vulnerable. Keanu's voice carried both pain and peace, as if he was leading everyone into a place that was dark, yet filled with unexpected light. He began to tell a story from years ago, about a time when his life was surrounded by silence. He didn't give dates or names at first, but the emotion in his tone made it clear. "I remember sitting alone in a small apartment," he said. "It felt like the world had ended. I had lost someone I loved, and nothing made sense. I would sit by the window and watch strangers walking by. I thought maybe the world had moved on without me." Joe's eyes softened, but he didn't interrupt. The audience leaned closer even though they were listening through screens. "One day," Keanu continued, "I went down to a cafe. I didn't even know why. I just couldn't stand being in the room anymore. I ordered coffee and sat there. A woman, maybe in her 70s, noticed me. She didn't know who I was, didn't care. She just looked at me and said, 'You look like you need someone to smile at you.' And she smiled. It was such a small thing, Joe. But in that moment, I felt like the universe hadn't completely abandoned me." His voice grew quieter, almost breaking. "That smile didn't fix everything, but it gave me one more day. And sometimes, that's all people need. Just one more day." Joe let the silence stretch again. This time it wasn't empty. It was full of weight, full of memory, full of respect. Then he asked, "So you think kindness can save lives?" Keanu looked up, his eyes shining with a softness that carried both pain and hope. "I don't think it can," he said. "I know it can." The hook was strong, the tension unshakable. The audience, who had clicked expecting stories about films or Hollywood gossip, now found themselves holding their breath, waiting to hear what would come next. This was no ordinary interview. This was a journey into the fragile heart of a man who had chosen kindness over bitterness, humility over pride, and silence over noise. And as the cameras stayed locked on his face, the world could see that he wasn't acting. He wasn't performing. He was telling the truth in its simplest form, and that truth was the beginning of everything. The unseen weight. The studio lights seemed brighter now, though no one had touched them. Joe Rogan shifted in his chair, his eyes never leaving Keanu. There was something in the air, an unspoken pull, as if every person watching could sense that the conversation was moving into even deeper territory. Joe leaned forward, his voice steady but curious. "You said kindness gave you one more day, but you're not talking about just surviving, are you? You're talking about something bigger." Keanu paused. His silence wasn't empty. It was filled with memories pressing against the surface. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of someone who had lived through storms most people only read about. "When life breaks you," he said softly, "you either stay broken or you find a way to give meaning to the pieces. For me, kindness became that meaning." His eyes drifted down as if he could still see the shadows of his past. But it wasn't always like that. I wasn't born gentle, Joe. I had anger. I had frustration. I wanted to fight the world for taking what I loved. But every time I tried to fight, I lost more. Until one day, I realized fighting wasn't strength. Kindness was. The audience was already hooked, but now Keanu pulled them closer with a story that no one had expected. "Years ago," he continued, "I was walking late at night in Los Angeles. It was raining, the kind of rain that makes every street feel like a mirror. I saw a man sitting by the road. He looked lost, soaked, maybe even dangerous. People were walking past him quickly as if he didn't exist. I almost did the same. I almost turned away. But then I remembered that cafe, that smile, that one moment that gave me a day. So I stopped." He leaned into the memory, his voice, carrying both fear and wonder. I asked him if he was okay. He didn't answer at first. He just stared at me with eyes that were empty, like he had been invisible for too long. I offered him half the sandwich I had. He took it slowly, and then he whispered, "You're the first person who has spoken to me in weeks." Joe, that broke me. Imagine existing in a world where no one even sees you for weeks. Joe exhaled, his eyes widening. "That's heavy, man. That's not just kindness. That's survival." Keanu nodded. It was his survival, but also mine. Because in that moment, I understood something. Kindness doesn't just heal the person receiving it. It heals the person giving it too. I walked away that night feeling lighter, even though nothing in my own life had changed. The weight of my grief didn't disappear, but it became something I could carry. The story gripped everyone, but Joe wasn't done pulling at the thread. "So you're saying kindness is like a bridge. It connects two broken worlds." "Yes," Keanu whispered. "And sometimes that bridge is the only thing that keeps both sides from falling." The hook deepened again as Keanu shifted into another. Memory. One that carried suspense and an unexpected twist. "I was once on a film set," he said. "Big production, big names, everything polished. One of the crew members made a mistake, a small one. But the director exploded," he yelled. "Insulted him, made him feel worthless in front of everyone." I could see the man shrink inside himself. I knew that feeling too well. So I walked over during the break. I didn't say much, just asked if he was okay, offered him water, reminded him that everyone makes mistakes. He didn't say anything at first, but the next day he came back to me with tears in his eyes. He said, "I was going to quit yesterday." Your words kept me here. The silence in the room grew heavier, but in a way that held respect. Joe shook his head slowly. "You probably don't even realize how many people you've changed just by doing that." Keanu smiled faintly. "The truth is, I don't think about it. I don't keep score, because kindness isn't about being remembered. It's about making sure someone else can keep walking, even if you never see them again. Joe tapped the table, his mind working fast. But doesn't that ever drain you? Doesn't giving so much leave you empty? The question carried suspense. Viewers leaned forward, waiting for the answer. Keanu lifted his gaze, calm but firm. It's the opposite. When I give, I don't lose, I gain, because every act of kindness is like planting a seed. Sometimes you never see it grow, but you know it's alive somewhere. The hook tightened as he added a final twist to his thought. And sometimes, he said, lowering his voice, that seed grows into something that saves you later. When you least expect it. Joe sat back, stunned. The audience could feel it too. This wasn't just a conversation. It was a slow unraveling of truths that most people spend a lifetime searching for. As the cameras kept rolling, there was no doubt anymore. This podcast wasn't going to be about entertainment or celebrity gossip. It was about the raw, unseen weight of life and how kindness had become the quiet force that carried Keanu Reeves through it all. And just as the tension seemed to settle, Keanu looked at Joe with eyes full of untold stories and said, "But there's one moment, Joe. One moment where kindness changed everything for me. And it wasn't about strangers. It was about someone I loved. It was the moment that taught me why kindness is more than survival, it's destiny." And with those words, the audience knew they couldn't look away. The memory that never left. The studio had grown quieter, even though no one had touched the equipment. It was the kind of silence that comes when people are afraid to move, afraid to breathe, because they know they are hearing something that matters. Joe Rogan leaned closer, his eyes sharp, but softened with respect. "You said there was one moment that changed everything. Tell me about it." Keanu's lips parted, but no words came out right away. He looked down at his hands, his fingers slowly curling into his palm as if he was holding something invisible. The pause itself became a hook, pulling the audience into the suspense of what he would reveal. Finally, he spoke. "There was a woman I loved," he said, his voice low, almost breaking. "We had dreams, we had laughter, we had plans. Life gave us hope, and then it took it away." The air in the room seemed to freeze. Joe didn't interrupt. The viewers leaned closer to their screens, waiting for the story that was already pulling at their hearts. "She was strong," Keanu continued, his eyes distant. "She carried light with her everywhere she went. But life doesn't care how much light you carry. She fell sick. It was fast, unfair, unstoppable. I tried everything. Joe, doctors, prayers, silence. Nothing worked. I remember sitting in that hospital room at night, listening to the machines, watching her sleep, and feeling more powerless than I ever had in my life." He took a breath, his chest rising with weight. "One night, I broke. I started crying, quietly, not wanting her to see. I didn't want her last memories to be of me falling apart. But she woke up. She looked at me, weak, but her eyes were calm. She reached for my hand, and then, with barely any strength, she whispered, 'Be kind. That's all that matters. Promise me you'll be kind.' The silence after those words was unbearable. Joe's throat tightened. The audience could feel their own eyes filling. That moment, Keanu said, his voice shaking, was the moment kindness became more than survival for me. It became my promise. It became my duty. Because when someone you love asks you for something with their last breath, you don't break that promise. You live it." The hook was undeniable. People who thought they were just watching a podcast now found themselves inside a love story marked by pain, a story that carried more truth than fiction ever could. Joe leaned forward, his voice trembling slightly. So kindness wasn't just a choice. It was a vow. Keanu nodded. "Yes, and that vow has followed me everywhere. When I hold the door for a stranger, it's for her. When I sit with someone who's hurting, it's for her. Every act of kindness I give, I give it because she asked me to. The story could have ended there, but Keanu wasn't done. He leaned back slightly, his eyes glistening. But here's the twist, Joe. Years later, when I thought I was keeping her promise by giving kindness, I realized something I never expected. Kindness was also coming back to me in ways I didn't see. Joe tilted his head. What do you mean? Keanu smiled faintly. There were days when I felt empty, when grief came back like waves. I would go out and a stranger would smile at me, or a child would wave, or a fan would say, "Thank you for being you." And suddenly I understood. Kindness doesn't vanish. It moves like energy. When you give it, it comes back when you need it most. Maybe not from the same person, maybe not in the same way, but it comes back. And every time it did, I felt her with me again. The viewers felt the hook tighten again. This wasn't just about pain anymore. It was about resilience, about how love and kindness ripple through time even after people are gone. Joe placed his hand on the table, steady but emotional. That's powerful. But don't you ever feel like kindness makes you vulnerable? Like people can take advantage of it? Keanu nodded slowly. They can, and sometimes they do. I've been hurt. I've been used. But here's the truth. I would rather be hurt by giving too much kindness than live with the regret of giving too little. Because regret lasts longer than pain. Joe exhaled sharply. That's deep, man. That's something people don't think about. Keanu's gaze grew sharper, his tone heavier. There's a world out there that teaches us to be strong by being cold, to protect ourselves by shutting others out. But strength isn't about walls. Strength is about opening your heart even when it risks breaking. That's what kindness is. It's courage. The hook deepened once more as he shared one last twist to the story. I kept that promise for her, he said. But what I didn't know is that promise would keep me too. There were days I wanted to give up, days I didn't see a reason to move forward. And then I remembered her words. Be kind. And that reminder became the rope that pulled me out of darkness again and again. Joe stared at him, speechless. The audience could feel it too. The rawness, the truth, the sense that they weren't just listening to an interview. They were being invited into the secret heart of a man who had suffered, survived, and turned his pain into something the world could learn from. The podcast cameras kept rolling, but in that moment, it wasn't about cameras anymore. It was about a memory that never left, a promise that had become a guiding light, and a vow that transformed grief into kindness, pain into purpose, and silence into strength. And just when the story felt like it had reached its deepest point, Keanu leaned forward, his voice steady but filled with quiet intensity. But Joe, the hardest test of kindness wasn't with strangers or even with her memory. It came when I had to face people who hurt me, people who didn't deserve my kindness. And that test almost broke me. The audience knew then. This was only getting deeper. When kindness met betrayal, the air in the studio was tense now, like the room itself knew that the story was moving into dangerous ground. Joe Rogan leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table, his eyes sharp with curiosity. You said the hardest test wasn't with strangers. It was with people who hurt you. Tell me about that. Keanu's face changed. His calm expression carried a shadow, as if the memory was heavy even to speak aloud. He took a breath and let the silence stretch, pulling the audience in before revealing the next layer. Life has a strange way of testing the promises you make, he began slowly. It doesn't test them when it's easy. It tests them when it's almost impossible to keep. I promised I would live with kindness. But then came the moments when people betrayed me, lied to me, and used me. And every part of me wanted to fight back with anger. The hook was strong already, but Keanu tightened it further with an unexpected story. There was a man I trusted, he said. We worked together on something important. I believed in him, gave him respect, gave him space. But one day, I found out he had taken advantage of that trust. He lied, cheated, and made sure I was the one who carried the blame. It wasn't just betrayal, Joe. It was humiliation. And in that moment, kindness felt like weakness. I thought, to myself, why am I kind if this is the result? Joe leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. So what did you do? Keanu's gaze stayed steady, his voice heavy with memory. I walked away. I didn't shout. I didn't fight. I walked away because I remembered my promise. But inside me, the anger burned. It stayed for days, weeks. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus. I kept asking myself if kindness was a mistake, if maybe the world only respected power, not softness. He let the words linger, creating suspense, and then added the twist. But then, something happened. Weeks later, I saw the same man again. His life had started to fall apart. People had discovered his lies. His success had crumbled. And when he looked at me, I saw fear in his eyes. He expected me to return the pain, to laugh at his fall. But instead, I only said, I hope you find peace. Joe exhaled slowly, shaking his head. That's not what most people would do. No, Keanu said softly. But here's what I realized in that moment. If I had answered betrayal with hate, then his actions would have shaped me. I would have let his darkness decide my path. But by choosing kindness, I kept my promise. I stayed myself. The audience could feel the pull of those words. This wasn't just a story of betrayal. It was a story of resilience, of choosing to remain whole when the world tried to break you apart. Joe's voice carried both disbelief and respect. But didn't that feel unfair? Like you let him get away with it? Keanu leaned forward, his tone calm but sharp. Life takes care of its own balance, Joe. I don't need to punish anyone. The truth always comes to light. My job is not revenge. My job is to keep my heart alive, because once you lose kindness, you lose yourself. The hook deepened again as Keanu revealed another story, one even more personal. There was someone else, he said quietly. Someone I loved. Not in the way of romance, but in the way of family. I gave them trust, gave them loyalty. But when the time came, they walked away. They left when I needed them most. I carried that wound for years, and for years, I asked myself if I could forgive them. I wanted to hate them. I wanted to erase them from my life. But every time the anger rose, I remembered her voice, the woman I loved, whispering to me in that hospital bed, "Be kind." And so I chose forgiveness even though it hurt. Joe tilted his head, his voice low. Forgiveness is the hardest form of kindness. Keanu nodded. Yes, because forgiveness isn't about saying what happened was okay. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of hate. Hate locks you in a prison. Forgiveness opens the door. But opening that door, that nearly broke me. The suspense was strong now, the audience clinging to every word. So what happened when you forgave them? Joe asked. Keanu's eyes softened, his voice trembling slightly. Nothing happened. They didn't come back. They didn't apologize. They moved on with their life. But something did change in me. I was free. I was no longer chained to their betrayal. And that freedom reminded me that kindness is not for those who deserve it. It's for those who need it. And sometimes the person who needs it most is yourself. Joe sat back, shaking his head slowly. That's deeper than I expected. People think kindness is just about smiling and being polite. But what you're saying is it's about survival of the soul. Keanu gave a faint smile. Exactly. It's easy to be kind when everyone is kind to you. The real test comes when you're betrayed, when you're hurt, when you're broken. If you can still be kind then, that's when you know it's real. The hook twisted once more as Keanu leaned forward, his eyes steady. But Joe, there was one test bigger than betrayal. One test where kindness didn't just save me, it saved someone else's life. And that moment still haunts me. The room froze, the suspense pulling the audience even deeper. The night kindness saved a life. The studio had grown so still that even the faint hum of the lights felt loud. Joe Rogan leaned in, his voice low but sharp. You said there was a moment when kindness didn't just save you, it saved someone else's life. Tell me about that. Keanu's face changed. He didn't smile, didn't soften. His expression was heavier than anything he had shown so far. He let the silence hang, stretching it until it became almost unbearable. The audience could feel the suspense growing, like a storm waiting to break. Finally, Keanu began. It was late. Los Angeles nights can be loud, but sometimes in the middle of the noise, there's silence you can feel. I was walking home, and I saw a man standing on the edge of a bridge. It was clear what he was about to do. His body leaned forward, his hands gripping the rail. People walked by, pretending not to notice. Maybe they were afraid. Maybe they didn't know what to say, but I couldn't walk past him. Something inside me stopped me. Joe's eyes widened. You're saying he was ready to end it? Keanu nodded slowly. Yes. I could see it in his eyes. Those were eyes that had given up. I didn't know him. He didn't know me. But in that moment, I knew that if I didn't say something, he might not be there the next second. The hook pulled tighter as Keanu described the scene with painful clarity. I walked closer. I didn't want to scare him, didn't want him to jump. So I spoke softly. I said, "Hey man, I don't know you, but I see you. And I want you to know you're not invisible." He didn't answer. He just stared at the water. So I stayed there. I told him I wasn't going anywhere. I told him I had been in dark places too, that I knew what it felt like to believe there was no reason to stay. I told him that maybe the world hadn't given him kindness, but I could give him mine in that moment. Joe whispered. What happened then? Keanu's voice trembled. He started crying. He didn't even look at me at first, but his hand slowly loosened from the rail. I kept talking, kept telling him that pain doesn't last forever, that sometimes just one more day can bring a change you don't expect. And then, after what felt like hours, he stepped back. He sat down on the ground, and he just cried. I sat with him. No cameras, no spotlight, no applause. Just two broken men sitting on the side of a bridge. Joe shook his head in awe. You saved his life. Keanu paused, his eyes glistening. Maybe. But here's the truth, Joe. He also saved mine. Because in that moment, I remembered that kindness isn't about grand gestures. It's about being present when someone needs it most. I didn't heal him. I didn't fix his problems. I just reminded him that he was seen. And in doing that, I reminded myself that I still had purpose. The audience felt the depth of that moment. But Keanu added another twist, pulling them further into the emotional storm. The next day, he found me. He tracked me down somehow. He told me he had planned everything that night. He had written letters, said his goodbyes in silence. He said if I hadn't stopped, he wouldn't be alive. And then he said something that still echoes in me. He said, "Your kindness was louder than my pain." Joe's eyes filled with tears he tried to hide. That's beyond powerful. Keanu nodded, his voice breaking slightly. That night taught me something I will never forget. We never know how close someone is to the edge. We never know what battles people are fighting in silence. Sometimes a word, a look, a hand on the shoulder can be the difference between life and death. Kindness doesn't just heal. Sometimes it rescues. The hook deepened again as Keanu leaned forward, his voice heavy with urgency. But here's the thing, Joe. That moment also scared me, because it made me realize how fragile people are. How many others are walking past the edge unseen? And I started asking myself, how many lives are lost because no one stopped to care? Joe exhaled, the weight of the words filling the room. So what you're saying is, kindness isn't just good, it's necessary. Keanu's eyes locked on his. Exactly. Kindness isn't decoration, it isn't something extra, it's survival. For all of us. We're all standing on some edge, even if no one else can see it. And what pulls us back isn't wealth, isn't power, isn't fame, it's kindness. It's someone saying, I see you. The suspense pulled tighter as Keanu added one last twist. But Joe, there was another moment after that. A moment when I was the one standing at my own edge. And the kindness that saved me came from the last person I ever expected. The audience froze. The tension was unbearable now. This wasn't just a story anymore. It was a cliffhanger into something even deeper, something personal, something no one saw coming. The kindness that saved me. The room felt heavier than before. Joe Rogan leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. You said there was a moment when you were the one standing on the edge. What happened? Keanu's eyes grew distant, his face calm but shadowed with memory. He let the silence breathe first, letting the audience feel the weight of his next words. After I lost her, he began softly, the woman I loved who asked me to promise kindness. There were nights when I didn't want to go on. The grief was so deep it felt endless. I was working, smiling, doing interviews, but inside I was breaking. I would go home, sit in the dark, and wonder if life had any meaning left. The hook tightened instantly. The audience leaned in, feeling the rawness of his confession. There was one night, Keanu continued, when the darkness was heavier than ever. I sat alone and I thought maybe I didn't want another day. Maybe her words were enough to carry me this far, but I didn't know if I could keep going. I walked outside and for a while I just wandered. I found myself sitting on a bench in the middle of the city. And that's when it happened. Joe whispered. What happened? Keanu's eyes softened. A faint smile breaking through the shadow. A stranger walked by. She didn't know who I was. She didn't know my pain. She just stopped, looked at me and said, Are you okay? 3 simple words. I didn't even answer. I just nodded. She smiled, wished me good night, and walked on. And Joe, that was enough. Those 3 words reminded me I was seen. That tiny act of kindness pulled me back from the edge. The silence in the studio was filled with emotion. Joe shook his head slowly. So the same way you saved that man on the bridge, someone saved you? Keanu nodded. Yes. And that's the truth most people don't understand. We all think kindness is something we give away, but sometimes it's the only thing keeping us alive. You never know how deep someone's pain is. You never know if your word, your smile, your simple act will be the thing that saves them. But it can. The hook deepened as Keanu leaned closer, his voice firm. And that's why I believe kindness is everything. Not success, not fame, not strength. Kindness. Because in the end, kindness is the only thing that connects us, the only thing that keeps us from falling apart. Everything else fades. Kindness remains. Joe exhaled, his voice cracking slightly. So that promise you made, it didn't just change you, it saved you. Keanu's eyes glistened. Yes, it saved me, and it saved others. And that's why I keep it. Not because I'm special, not because I'm strong, but because I know the truth. One act of kindness can echo forever. It can change lives you don't even know. It can save someone who is ready to give up. It can remind the world that hope still exists. The podcast studio was silent again, but this silence wasn't heavy. It was sacred. The audience who had been watching for entertainment now sat with tears, with reflection, with the deep realization that kindness wasn't just a theme in a story. It was a lifeline. Joe finally leaned back, shaking his head with respect. Keanu, I've done thousands of episodes, but I don't think I've ever had a conversation like this. You didn't just talk about kindness. You showed us why it matters. You showed us why it's the only thing that lasts. Keanu smiled gently. Thank you, Joe. But it's not about me. It's about everyone watching this right now. Whoever you are, whatever pain you're carrying, remember this: you don't have to change the world. Just be kind to one person today. And maybe, just maybe, that kindness will be the light they need to keep going. And one day, it might be the light that saves you too. The camera stayed on his face for a long moment, capturing the stillness, the sincerity, the truth. And then, slowly, the screen faded, leaving the words hanging in the air like a vow.